Fox News did another pity the poor billionaires routine. This is something that they're very used to doing. Let's take a look.
You're writing about it in the Wall Street Journal this morning. Who needs billionaires, right, you ask? AOC demands even more onerous taxes. And New York Governor Andrew Cuomo says, not so fast. He's trying to get those billionaires to come back to the city, and she's trying to tax them more.
Right. Right. It's an insane dynamic in New York. You know, New York has 118 billionaires. And the idea of the left, of Mayor de Blasio and AOC, who of course is in Congress, is to squeeze them even further for the money that New York needs. It's going to have a shortfall because of COVID. But there's no realization, as the governor's trying to show them, there's no realization that these people can move anywhere they want. And if you make it too high, the taxes, they'll just go to some place that treats them better. And you'll be worse off. You'll have less revenue. And that's particularly true. I think COVID has exposed the weakness of a state like New York or California that relies heavily on a few people at the top to pay the bulk of the taxes. Again, that was Governor Cuomo's point. And if the more you rely on them, the more hurt you are if even a handful leave, because you'll take a big hit to your revenues.
Governor Cuomo has basically resorted to begging on this issue to get people back to the city. Listen to Governor Cuomo here. I'll play it for our audience.
I literally talk to people all day long who are now in the Hamptons house, who also lived here, or in their Hudson Valley house, or in their Connecticut weekend house. And I say, you got to come back. When are you coming back? We'll go to dinner. I'll buy you a drink. Come over, I'll cook. They're not coming back right now. And you know what else they're thinking? If I stay there, they pay a lower income tax because they don't pay the New York City surcharge.
Because they're not getting the lifestyle that they were and in some cases still are paying for, Bill, right? You have to have the incentive to get those people back. Right. You write this in your piece. Billionaire former Mayor Michael Bloomberg once said New York City is a luxury, meaning people were willing to pay more for the high value it provides. The question is whether the wealthy will still be willing to pay that premium and underwrite the spending for a city where shootings and murders are on the upswing, not to mention rising homelessness and other afflictions. And if the governor hopes to persuade billionaires now thinking of leaving to stay put, he'll have to offer them more than a home-cooked dinner, Bill.
Right, and it doesn't look like that's coming, given the agitation by Mayor de Blasio. You know, Albany's answer is they're considering two bills, one a tax on billionaires and another tax on ultra-millionaires. They're just increasingly making the state more hostile to wealth. And I'd say Governor Cuomo is absolutely right on his point about this. However, he's not quite the supply sider that it sounds like. He wants the federal government to raise taxes and then send the money back to the states. Not only would that spare him the political problems with raising taxes, he'd get the revenue without making New York State less attractive. So it's a mess all around, and as we've been saying, it's going to be harder for these cities, especially now that tens of thousands of people are learning you can keep your job and you don't have to live. You don't even have to live in the New York area. I'm in New Jersey, but I could be in Texas.
You know, we're showing beautiful images of Manhattan. It's not the image that you see portrayed in the New York Post these days, with moms fearing walking up and down the sidewalks with baby carriages. Right. They fear the lawlessness that is happening in the streets of this city right now, Bill.
So they are 25% correct and 75% wrong. So let me break that down for you. When they say, hey, listen, you can't, like, if New York State or New York City put into place a billionaire's tax, that definitely would make it so that people just move right over the border into Connecticut or move into New Jersey. Or I do think that would happen. I think there's evidence that would happen. So if you do it at a state level or a city level, there will be consequences. There will be, repercussions. Now, where they're wrong, they would argue even at the federal level, you can't do a billionaire's tax, and they would make, a similar argument to that. But they would be wrong at the federal level. They would be wrong. It's not like, oh, if you have a billionaire's tax at the federal level, that billionaires are just going to flee the country because the U.S. market is far too lucrative. If they just flee the country, then they're, foregoing so much in the process of doing that they wouldn't do it. And history kind of shows that when we had really high taxes on the rich, it didn't lead to some sort of a mass exodus. Now, would they try to hide their money in tax havens or whatever? They already try to hide their money in tax havens and stuff. But they always miss the point here, conservatives. They act like that's some sort of argument against higher taxes on the wealthy. No, that's just an argument for fewer loopholes and better enforcement of the law. You understand what I'm saying? Like, they're already hiding their money in the Cayman Islands, using tax havens, doing tax avoidance. You have to get rid of those loopholes, and you have to find a way to penalize that more so that they're incentivized to actually pay their taxes. So, they always look at it from the wrong perspective. It's like, oh, they're already trying to dodge taxes, so obviously we shouldn't have taxes? No, that's an argument for better enforcement. So now, again, as I said, at the city level or the state level, yes, you are going to run into some issues if it's only one city or one state that has these billionaire taxes. You really do need to do it at the federal level. And actually, see, they would never tell you the history of this, but that's what I'm here to do. That's what I'm here to do. So, in 1932, the top marginal tax rate was increased to 63% during the Great Depression. Now, why did they do that? Very simple. Redistribution of wealth. You have a Great Depression. The stock market crash was in 1929, and we had the Great Depression, and people were out of work, people were miserable, there was widespread poverty, and the people at the top were hoarding the wealth. And so FDR said famously, I welcome their hatred. You want to hate me? That's fine. Keep hating me, bitch. I'm taxing you. I'm going to take the money and I'm going to use it for public works programs. I'm going to use it for the New Deal. So he raised the top marginal tax rate to 63%, just so everybody understands, because some people don't, especially conservatives. A marginal tax rate doesn't mean that the government steps in and says, I'm going to take 63% of all of your money. That's not what that means. A marginal tax rate means everything above a certain line is taxed at 63%. So for argument's sake, these are not the real numbers, but for argument's sake, like your first, and actually I have the real number here. I could give you the real number. The equivalent of $2.8 million in today's money. So if you make $3 million, okay, it's only the top like 200,000 or so, where that would be taxed at that higher rate of 63%. It would just be everything from 2.8 up to the 3 million. That's taxed at the higher rate. Everything under that is taxed at the lower rates. So just so everybody understands, because some people really don't understand how a marginal tax rate works, and literally like a majority of the Republican discourse when we're talking about taxes, and I know because they did it to Bernie Sanders too, they pretend like Bernie wants to take 90% of your money. Oh my God. And it's like, first of all, no, because everybody's in a much lower tax bracket than the top marginal rate. So first of all, no. But second of all, not even for the wealthiest does he want to take 90% of their money. He's not even for a 90% marginal tax rate. But even if he was, it's not what you think it is. It's not how they're portraying it, like the government's taking 90% of your money. So in 1932, they raised the top marginal tax rate to 63% during the Great Depression because you have to redistribute when there's an economic downturn. Does that sound familiar? Yes, it does. Now, Fox News would argue against this with terrible arguments, but this is what we should do. And also, it was steadily increased, reaching its peak in 1944. The top marginal rate was 94% on income above $2.8 million in today's money. Imagine that. That was the law in the United States of America. You had a 94% tax on income above $2.8 million. Now, Conservatives might say, that's wildly unfair. It's so unfair. Is it? Is it? Your first $2.8 million taxed at a significantly lower rate? I think you're going to be okay. The 94% rate above the $2.8 million mark. By the way, that's not even the actual rate of what they would pay. There's loopholes and deductions. So the effective tax rate, the effective top marginal rate was more like 50%, 45%. So the government, all the income above $2.8 million, the government would really take 45 or 50% of that. And you know what? We had much, much less income and wealth inequality, which means we had a much more thriving middle class, which means everybody got a better shot at the American dream. Of course, society wasn't perfect. And of course, we had deep, deep, bigotry in the country and systemic racism and Jim Crow. And, that stuff wasn't even attempted to be addressed in any serious way until the civil rights movement, which was later on. But in terms of the economic system, yes, people generally felt like, I have a shot, I could live a decent life, perhaps my kids will have it even better than I do. And one of the reasons for it is when you have high taxes on the wealthy, you can use that for programs that are better for everybody. That are better for everybody. And the other thing is, people don't acknowledge this, but extreme wealth threatens a democratic system by its very nature. Because if you have people that have so much wealth, they effectively can control the system. They can control the system, they can buy the politicians, they can rig the rules in their favor, and really you have oligarchs. So that dynamic in and of itself is a strong argument to always curtail extreme wealth. That's not saying nobody can get rich. That's not saying everybody's going to make the same. No. But it's saying on the margins, yes, you should have no extreme poverty. You should have no poverty. And, you should have nobody who's above a certain mark of wealth. Where do we want to draw that line? Listen, that's a longer debate. And that's a difficult debate, too. Some people will say just no billionaires. Just no billionaires. Other people will say, I wouldn't necessarily go that far. I think we could all agree no trillionaires is a good goal, right? Some people would disagree, but it's like, really? You want one person, and Jeff Bezos probably will at some point, have become a trillionaire. At the same time, 76% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Half of workers make $30,000 a year or less in this country. Our infrastructure is crumbling. 30 million people, no health care. We got all these problems, but it'll be okay if one American, Jeff Bezos, has $1 trillion. See, this is the problem. This is the problem. That those things are connected. They are connected. Tax that guy, take the money. He'll still be rich. He'll still be fine. Tax that guy, take the money, put it towards healthcare, put it towards education. This used to be called common sense, guys. It used to be common sense. So yes, we need higher top marginal tax rate on the rich, higher capital gains tax. We need to redistribute in public works. Give people jobs, for example, or do a UBI, which is crucially important. There's all this stuff that we can do, especially now with the pandemic and the depression. And instead, what does Fox News do? They run interference for billionaires. They go out there and mock and laugh at the idea of raising taxes on the rich as if it's some sort of crazy idea. When the history of the United States, for such a long time, we had really high top marginal taxes on the wealthy. And by the way, that just happens to coincide with what was called the golden age of economic expansion in the United States. You want to know why? Because social democratic policies work, and that's all we're asking for.